I have Amanda back in with me today. For those of you who haven't heard, you should have heard by now, but Amanda is marketing in Prosperous.
Yep.
And we work together on a daily basis, and she has agreed to come in again to give your questions to me. So Amanda is the conduit. And she also kind of is trying to call me out and stuff that I'm trying to dodge and do a politician's answer on. So let's go for it, Amanda.
Yeah. Just to start, thanks very much to everybody who sent their questions over by voice note. It's great. Obviously, the podcast wouldn't happen without them. The first question, the person actually wanted to have their voice remain anonymous. So I'm going to read out their question.
I think that's really important for people to realise. Like, one of the things when we're talking about guests or we're talking about queries coming in by voice note or whatever it is, one of the things we don't have to do with the podcast that some people might associate with the TV show is we don't have to get into the nitty gritty detail about how much you make and how much you're spending, any of that stuff. We want to hear your stories and your relationship with money. That's what we're interested in here. It's not about how much do you spend in McDonald's in a week. And where you want to voice an opinion, a question or whatever else it is, and you want to remain anonymous, we will absolutely always respect that. And that's why you're doing it. You're going to read this out. Remind everyone as well just to say, I haven't heard these questions before and that's the way I like it. I want to just hear them live for the first time when we're recording.
Yeah. So the first question came in from a individual, part of a couple in their late 20s. They're looking to move in together. They've enough saved for a deposit. They have spoke about getting married, but they want to prioritise getting a house over marriage. And what they really want to know is what your thoughts are on buying together before marriage and if there's anything they should be conscious of with that decision.
Throw me in the cauldron there, don't you? It's interesting because Connor just described a minute ago where they prioritised the wedding over the house and they did it the other way round. And whenever we throw a poll up, Amanda, I'm sure we've done a couple of polls together on Instagram. It's interesting to see the different split between what people think should come first. What I would say is, look, the legal system, and I'm not a solicitor, the legal system does protect people who are married better than it does when it comes to joint assets, better than it does an individual. But that is slowly changing, right? What I would say, though, is that when it's 50-50 going into this, if something goes wrong, you would expect it to be 50-50 on the way out as well, and that the legal system would prepare you for that, right? And I accept that they have talked about marriage. I accept that they're prioritising the house over the marriage. And I'm not talking about it from emotional or a heartfelt perspective. I'm only talking about it from a financial perspective. There is a further complication here that people often overlook, and it's particularly in the first 3 years. So if you buy a house with somebody who you're not married to, and that other person dies in the first 3 years, their 50% of their house, although all the legal agreements may end up paying it, like it says you're getting it, but you could actually get hit for tax on that, particularly in the first 3 years.
Okay.
Because this is, from a taxman's point of view, this is a stranger and they're giving you 50% of a house.
Yeah.
And there is ways, and if you get the right advice and set up the life cover in particular in the right way, you can get around this and you'll still have the tax bill to pay, but you'll receive their 50% tax paid, okay, if you set it up right, and get some advice on that if that's the route you're going, okay? Excuse me. But what I would say is that if this person's buying a house with this other person and that this couple are together and they're buying a house together, it is important that it does sound to me like they're committed to each other and they want to stay. Yeah. And marriage is not for everybody. And the tax system is very unfair. And we've done polls on that as well in the past, where it's usually mid 70% of people would say, no, the tax system should be changed to reflect the fact that we have long-term relationships now.
And cohabiting couples rather than...
Yeah, I do think the most important thing that person needs to do is communicate with their partner. We're not married. We're buying this house together. I always use this one, blame Eoin McGee. Eoin McGee said to somebody in a similar situation to us that we need to talk about this. And when you're in with the solicitor, talk to the solicitor about, you're going to have to get a solicitor to buy the house anyway, talk to the solicitor about, we want to protect each other here. We love each other. We have no intentions of splitting up, but we want to protect each other here. And how do we do it? When it comes to this asset, this property, how do we make sure that that's protected? That if something happens, we have a way out. And that's the same whether you're doing something with your brother, your best friend, or your partner. You should talk today about what it's going to look like if something changes down the road. And if you don't talk about it today because you find it too hard to talk about it today, can you imagine how hard it's going to be in the future when things have gone wrong?
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Like really, it's like anything with couples, communication is key, and but it is in some ways unfair, really, isn't it, that a married person is treated
differently.
Yeah.
And the system doesn't work. And you think it's bad from that, particularly on death, the difference is ridiculous for couples.
And you think I know obviously this person mentioned that they have spoke about marriage, and a lot of people I think are in similar situations to this, where they're choosing either the house or the marriage or the wedding, I suppose. Yeah. Because they're both massive expenses, and you do have to choose which one you want to go with first. But yeah, no, I think you covered.
Yeah, let's just face it, the system is not set up. We are traditionally a Catholic country that got married. That's what we were. And that's what we were. And I think that's the important part of it. We're no longer that. It's still incredibly important to some people, and I respect them people. And marriage means nothing to other people, but the tax system doesn't respect that marriage means nothing to other people.
So we're going to play question 2 now.
Hi, Eoin. Just wanted to say, first of all, love the new podcast. The other thing is, I have a question about couples finance. My husband and I got married in March of this year. He has recently got a promotion, which means he now makes more money than me, which is great. And we're delighted about that. And I suppose my question is, what's the best way to organise a couple's finance when you're married? We have a joint account for all our bills and for our mortgage. And then we're thinking about setting up a joint savings account for things like house renovations and joint projects.
Okay. It's interesting because, and people should know, I record this in chronological order. Like the way you're listening to it is the way I've recorded it. So I hadn't heard that question, but yet I referenced someone getting a big pay rise in my introduction today.
Yeah.
You don't know that, Amanda, because you just walked into studio, right? So that was pure chance, and it did just by mistake, I suppose. Interestingly, they have got the pay rise. That's changed the financial dynamics, which is probably causing this question to kind of come to the top, is what I would say.
Yeah, but and they're recently married, I think, as well.
Recently married, recent pay rise, a lot of financial change, but a lot of couple change as well. Like for that couple, there's a lot of change going on. And what's great about the person is they're asking, what way is the right way to do this? Okay. Mm-hmm. And the right way to do this is to sit down together and decide. And it's a real politician's answer. I don't have the answer. You have the answer between you. But that is the answer. You need to sit down together and you need to say, what works for us? What is the right way of doing this? Like we saw how Connor and his partner do it. There's other couples, like we saw about the poll that we did, showed us that about 50% of people do a hybrid approach where they do the joint account and 2 separate accounts on the side, or 2 satellite accounts on the side that they own themselves. And that works for some people. What I will say is, though, certain couples would split up if they had a joint account. And I mean that. Mm-hmm. And certain couples would split up if they didn't have a joint account.
Yeah.
And it's about deciding yourselves what the right way to do it is. There's lots of methods you can use. You can say, okay, what are the bills? Split them 50-50. And if 50% of the bills happens to be all of your salary, tough, right? And if it's only 60% of the other person's salary, they have 40% to spend on whatever they want to spend, right? And that's one way that could be done.
Yeah.
What do you think of that way?
I think, I'd be very much of the opinion. Now, this is just a personal opinion, but when there's such a difference in salary, I suppose money is only one part of a relationship, and do you really want to be leaving your partner with nothing disposable at the end of the day because you can afford to spend that bit more?
And I'm giving you the extreme, but there are people who will work like that. They will say, well, sorry, this is the lifestyle we have and 50% of the bills are this, and I just happen to have money left over and you don't, and that's tough. Mm-hmm. Or that's the extreme. The other example of it is that, well, 50% of the bills are 90% of your income. But they're only 60% of my income. So you've got 10% left. I've got 40% left of my income. And there is an imbalance there. But you know what? You still have your 10%. You want to do something about it, go get a better job or better salary or whatever it is, whatever the wording is that person uses, right? So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is saying, you know what? My salary is 100, your salary is 50. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover twice the cost, 2/3 of all the bills. So my contribution to the joint bills is twice as much as yours is.
Yeah.
And that keeps it all fair. And then the other one is some people will say, you know what I'm going to do? Whatever the bills are, we're going to cover them. We'll put everything into a joint account and we both get 1,000 a month each or 500 a month each or 100 euros a month or whatever the figure is, right? And we say we get our own money, which is equal as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes people kind of feel we have to get to equal, right? And when it becomes a little bit like that, just be careful that you're not getting to a point where, everything has to be 50-50, everything has to be equal. No, we both have to be doing the things we want to do, right? And one person, for example, like just to give another extreme example, one person might get a huge amount of joy out about going for a 3-hour walk every Saturday, which doesn't cost anything, right? The other person might get a huge amount of joy out about spending 3 hours on the golf course every Saturday, right? Oh, did I hit a nerve?
I think a lot of people can relate to that one.
Yeah. And the golfing obviously costs more money than the walk does.
Yeah.
But as a couple, you're trying to support each other to do the thing that you want to do. Like that you're trying to, if you get really brought up in the couples thing, you're trying to make the other person be the best that they can be and support them to do that.
Yeah.
And that's what a couple should be about. And if the couple finances can support both people doing what they really want to do, then you're onto a winner, and it doesn't have to always be 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of ways you can cut this up. And what I would say to that person, their question was, how do we do this? You do it by sitting down and talking to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think from a lot of the messages even that have come in from it, clear communication is the key, really.
Yeah.
And actually talking.
Yeah.
Talking about money.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm not sure I should go here. But you know what, we will. It's the podcast. We'll give it to them. I was asked this question, right? And I learnt my lesson, so you're never going to get this again off me, right? But I was asked this question on a Saturday Q&A one time. How should we deal with our finances? How should we split them up? Very similar question to that there, right? And I was on a night out and I was at the table. The person I was with went off to the loo or something. Or I assume it was that. I started flicking through the Q&A. And I answered.
This is how Owen spends his Saturday nights.
And I was flicking through and I says, there's a question about couples finances. How do you answer? And I had a few beers on board and I replied, right? I thought no more of it. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, ooh, that was blunt. Ooh, that was a tough one. Jesus, you went hard on them. So if that person's listening, look, you caught me at a moment where I have to answer this quickly before I'm joined again. And maybe my filter was down a little bit. I basically told them, will you just sit down at the kitchen table and talk to each other instead of talking to me on an Instagram app on a Saturday morning or a Saturday evening. And it was a bit harsh. It was a bit tough, but I was probably had my guard down. I don't usually answer questions.
No.
With a drink on me.
You're normally.
That's how I spend my Saturday evenings, is right.
No, I think that.
Okay. Was there a second part to that question?
There is a second part to that question.
Is this the two-parter one?
Yeah,
okay, right. Let's clear the second part of it.
Another question I have is in relation to having babies, getting pregnant. Don't want to know how to do it, just more so how to finance it. So what's the best way to finance, potentially longer term maternity leave? Most people get 6 months paid leave, and then you've got a 6-month gap where you might need to plug a hole. So what's the best way to do that? Is it saving up when you can on your pregnancy journey? How are couples supposed to do that? Thanks so much, Owen. Bye.
Do you get from that, Amanda? I don't get from that, and just correct me wrong, she's not talking about financing IVF or anything like that. She's talking about financing the paid maternity leave when that runs out and going to unpaid maternity leave potentially.
Absolutely. I think from that question, it is, we're looking into having a baby.
Right.
And how can we find how best to prepare.
Okay, again, I know I'm broken record at this stage. Communication is key here, but one of the things is assuming one salary is going to be depleted or disappear, and whether that's because of pregnancy and having a baby, or that's because of something else in like some other circumstances change, or someone goes back to college or whatever else. The preparation is very, very similar. You have to establish how long is the salary going to be different for. So if it's college, it's going to be 2 years or 4 years or whatever else it is, right? If it's a career break or if it's maternity leave, how long is the salary going to be different for is the first thing you need to question yourself on. The best way, but the most difficult way of doing it is from next month, live on the reduced salary.
Yeah.
And see how it feels. And do it for a month and just really see the stuff that you can't do anymore, okay? That the luxuries that have come into your life, and hopefully it's just luxuries. If you're taking bread and milk off the table, you need to reassess. But if it's taking luxuries off the table that you just can't do that this month, well, then you need to question yourself about, okay, is that actually going to work for me? Because whatever about doing a trial run and see how it goes, that can work really well. It can teach you an awful lot. But there's a way out at the end of the month. You still have got your salary had come in and you still have the money there. But that's a perfect way of doing it, but it's a very difficult way of doing it. If you can do that and you say to yourself, okay, yeah, I can do it with no salary. You don't have a whole pile of preparation to do. Or my salary disappeared for the month. I have no salary. My reduced salary, I could live off that and I'm fine. Great. Feck all preparation to do. Keep your finances going as they are. If you find, you know what, I went from 100% to 0% salary and I really couldn't do it, look at 50% and go halfway between the two and say, maybe the next month, and I know this takes time, but look at, or maybe you can do this with an Excel spreadsheet either if you don't do the actual time. If I had 50% of my income, could I survive? And could I survive for 6 months on 50% of my income? And you know what you do there? The next 6 months, you save 50% of your income and you have the following 6 months with the 50% when your salary is stopped. And that's the second way of doing it. But the best way of doing it is really sit down, communicate with each other, talk to each other about how it's going to work. This is a time where, particularly if it's if it's one person supporting the other, or there's a child coming into the house for the first time or the second time or the third time, if it's a family decision that's being made, the other person, particularly if they're on a higher salary, or particularly if it's been very 50-50 up to now, where somebody has to step up and the other person has to step up. But try and figure out first what the end looks like. How much is 6 months off going to cost me? If I'm on €1,000 a month, it's going to cost me £6,000. If I think I can survive on half my salary, which is £500 a month, and I'm making the numbers up, obviously, it's going to cost me €3,000. Where's that €3,000 going to come from? You know what? We spend £3,000 a year on holidays. We won't go on holiday that year. Try and figure out what the end looks like and work backwards from there. What's the big number? And work backwards from there and see what resources have we got. Have we got a bit of savings that's going to cover it for that couple of months? Have you any chance of a promotion? You know the way we usually use your bonus to do that? Or could we temporarily reduce our contribution to other things like pensions or savings? Could we talk to the mortgage provider and say, will you give us 6 months of an interest only or 6 months break? And some of the old contracts would have done that without having to go in through underwriting. It didn't affect your credit. It was just the terms and conditions. You can write them and say, I need 3 months off here. And you can do that as well. And what I would say...
At any stage? Can you do that at any stage?
Some of the really old contracts now would have had it as a kind of a feature of the thing. Write to us at any time you want. Having a child, doing something different, taking a break from work. Write to us and we'll give you 3 months off your mortgage or 6 months off your mortgage.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if they still... I'm not aware of them doing them at the moment, but we're talking if your thing is kind of 15 or 20 years old, you could find it's on it.
Okay.
So talk to your mortgage provider, you might get a break. So start at the end.
Worth having that conversation as well.
Yeah,
anyway.
it is. Yeah. And just make sure that whatever you do with the mortgage, it's not going to affect your credit. Okay. But what I would say there is you need to start at the end. Figure out what the big number is and then try and find ways of plugging that gap and saying, how are we going to do it? And there might be some lifestyle choices you'll have to make, but this is a lifestyle choice in itself. For that person, it's about having a baby and it's a lifestyle choice. But also is if going back to college or doing something else that the couple decides this is important to us.
Can apply.
And start with the big number, work backwards.
And I suppose it's important to note as well that a baby coming in to the mix will also add expenses.
Yes.
So it's nearly, would you suggest when you're going back, I suppose, looking at can we survive on this, adding, say, a certain amount or...
If I think everybody knows somebody who has kids, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think nobody's going to disagree with is parents love talking about their kids, right? We're not a great country for talking about money, but parents love talking about their kids. So what I would suggest you do is, rather than us going through it here, go and have a chat with a mammy who will be only too delighted to tell you how much it costs them, to how much extra money it's costing them on a month-to-month basis, and that'll give you a real indication of the extra costs. That's a good call because I had kind of jumped over that bit.
Yeah.
So go talk to a friend of yours who is a mammy who has young kids, and they will tell you. They'll be only too delighted to tell you all about it.
Yeah.
Is there any more today? Have we got any more questions coming?
No, that's all our questions for today.
Okay.
I suppose we did get more questions in.
But we don't have time for the rest of the time.
Yeah, we don't have time.
What I will say, Amanda, and actually I'm going to say this to the listener, not to Amanda. Amanda spends a huge amount of her week sifting through the questions, asking people to send them over by voice note. So I want to make, and I want the listener to make, Amanda's life a little bit easier. So we do have a request. At any time,
Yeah.
If you have a question, it doesn't matter what the topic is. We'll usually give you a shout out on Instagram to say this is what the topic's going to be. Do you have any specific questions on that? But at any time, if you've got a question that you want to put to the podcast, or if you'd like to come on as a guest, right? It's the same contact details. Amanda's going to give out a mobile number now. If it's the Prosperous mobile phone. It's not anyone's individual phone. So
it's not a personal number.
Yeah, it's not a personal number. So don't expect a reply at 9 o'clock on a Saturday after a few beers.
No, not like you.
Not like me, yeah. That was a long time ago. But so Amanda, what is the contact details for people who have queries, questions, comments, or want to put themselves forward to say, I'd love to come on the show and talk to you about my story, or you know what, Amanda, Owen, is there any chance you get such and such on the show? They're deadly.
So the contact detail is 087 291 0507. That's 087 291 0507.
So if you have comments, queries, voice notes, questions, suggestions for yourself or other people to be on the show, that's the contact details for the show.
Yeah.
And I'd really appreciate if you made Amanda's job a little bit easier, a lot easier, that you can just send them directly to there.
And preferably voice notes. It is great to have the voice clips. But if there is a case that you do want to ask a question that's quite important to you and you don't want your voice heard, we can also look after that.
Can I just preempt this? This is stuff for the podcast only. There's not, I didn't get your question on a Q&A on Insta on a Saturday and this is an alternative way of getting your question. That's not what this is for. It's a completely different telephone line. It's for podcast stuff only.
Yeah.